What up, everyone, and welcome back to the Fitness Stuff for Normal People podcast. I'm Tony.
And I'm Mariana.
And the fitness industry right now is just not what it could be. It's become something built on unrealistic expectations, aesthetics, and external validation, just directing attention from the stuff that actually matters. The bottom line is we're not just trying to provide another fitness podcast. There's enough of those, but completely change the fitness industry for the better by giving you the knowledge and tools so you have the confidence in applying the best possible training and nutrition into your own life. Where today it is not only the first of the year, it's our 100th episode. And we are doing an updated rendition of one of our most popular episodes to date from almost 2 years ago, which is how to successfully set up a cutting or fat loss phase. Because hint, it's January 1st, but if you want to look good for spring or summer, you should probably be starting today or pretty dang soon. But one of my favorite things about doing this podcast is that we learn and update our opinions and knowledge so much. From speaking to incredible guest experts to digging for hours through the newest research as it continues to come out to prepare for each episode. So today we are going to take everything that we have learned, our updated practices with ourselves and our clients, to walk you through every single step you need to set up a successful fat loss or cutting phase. From exactly what your workouts need to look like, how much cardio and what kind of cardio you need to be doing, how to structure your weight training specifically towards fat loss, and how to dial in what your calories, macros, and meal structure would need to be depending on how aggressive you want to go. And then the most important part, which is setting up your exit strategy so you don't lose everything you've made. Whether your goal is to cut down to a six-pack or just get to a manageable and healthy weight, maybe it's somewhere in between, today's episode matters. Now, if you forgot to send us a Christmas present, it's all right. We forgive you. What you could actually do to make this up to us is by taking the next 15 seconds while finishing the intro to go rate us 5 stars on whatever platform you are listening to us on. And if you're on Spotify and you do not follow us yet, 1, what are you doing? 2, you know you can do that now, right? You can follow us on Spotify. So every single Monday when we drop a new episode, it pops right up on your homepage so you don't miss a thing. And what's better than free stuff to celebrate the new year? To celebrate our 100th episode, if you go and rate us 5 stars or have already rated us 5 stars, screenshot it and shoot us a DM on Instagram at fs.pod. And you're entered to win a $250 Legion Athletic supplement giveaway and a free year of FS Premium. That's going on for the next 2 weeks. What is FS Premium, Mariana?
FS Premium can give you a little bit more after each episode. It is just $5 a month, and you get bonus episodes every single Friday where we answer your own questions. You also get full training programs like our full body high frequency program, our ultimate push-pull leg program, along with other mobility programs that we just dropped, and more coming in 2024 that we're really excited about. You also get more perks like a weekly Legion supplement giveaway, exclusive discounts, and much more. You can go and sign up in our show notes below. Now, you definitely don't need supplements to build muscle, lose fat, get healthy, but the right ones can definitely help. So, a little word from our sponsor, Legion Athletics. We did an episode not too long ago for the top 5 best and worst supplements for fat loss. If you didn't listen to it, whey protein came in at number 1 because you'll learn today how important protein is for fat loss. And a good whey protein shake, it's low calorie, packs a solid amount of protein to help keep you fuller longer, save or build lean body mass, as well as lose weight, and also ultimately just makes fat loss an easier process. Legion's Whey Plus is lactose-free, so it's easy on digestion as well. It comes from small dairy farms in Ireland with grass-fed cows and gives you 22 grams of protein for just 100 calories. It's insane. It's delicious. And you can use the Legion link in our show notes below or type in code FSPOD to get 20% off your first order or double points on every order after that.
The little grass-fed cows.
Get some protein in 2024.
They're so cute. The little grass-fed cows. It's a new year. It's a new us.
It's a new year.
We're still the same. We're still rocking.
I know. I don't have any, honestly. I never really make. I reflect on goals probably from a month-to-month basis. So I don't really make big goals in the new year, to be honest.
Yeah, like massive changes. I'm with you. I do more of like a past year review to see what I did really well, what I could be doing better on, stuff like that. But I don't like do anything, set anything in a massive chain of motion starting on January 1st. Usually not, at least this year, not in the same, but a big review, which I was proud of myself last year, proud of us last year. We just jumped up at the end of the year to the 35th spot on Spotify's top 50, which is a big deal. Thanks to y'all. Our goal next year, Top five. Top five.
We can do it. I believe
we can't be
us.
number one because we would never want to take it from Huberman. We wouldn't want to. That's what I tell myself, at least. I'm like, you know what? We can leave that. We'll be number two. We got a doozy today, though.
We do. Before we get into our doozy, I have a question for Tony, and
Before
it's
the
kind of
doozy?
relevant with the new year. There's going to be a lot more trends that I'm sure we're going to be addressing throughout 2020. But looking specifically at the dietary supplement industry, every year, Consumer Reports and the FDA does a review on the top categories of supplements that have been recalled for containing illegal ingredients. So they put together this grouping, and I want to ask Tony if he can guess what the top 4 dietary supplement categories are that have been recalled for containing illegal ingredients in 2023.
Recalled. So this is not even just ineffective. This is straight up potentially harmful. Can you give me an example of that? What does a category consist of?
So
would
like
protein
greens powders would be.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So not just like weight loss supplement. Okay, I'm going to say
them before.
Testosterone boosters.
Yes. And this
That's
is in
one.
no particular order. And do you want to know
Hormone
what they were recalled for containing most commonly?
Ooh, what?
Erectile dysfunction inhibitors.
Oh,
So
those sneaky little.
yeah.
They just take a pill. Like, they look down their pants, like, oh my god, it worked. It worked. Okay, so testosterone boosters. I'm going to say fat burners has to be up there from like a stimulant perspective. They got to contain
stimulants.
Okay, I was like excessive amounts of stimulants. I would normally say greens powders, but I'm not going to say it because I think you wouldn't have listed that as an example. So I'll say pre-workout.
No, which I was shocked about.
I'm
not sure if you'll get these next two.
What are they? What are the next two? Because I'm already kind of stumped.
The next one is anti-inflammatory supplements. And then after that is...
So not like NSAIDs, like Advil, Tylenol, but like supplements?
Yeah, and for containing NSAIDs. So
it's like an herbal supplement that claims to reduce inflammation, and really they're just putting...
And they contain NSAIDs.
Of course they are.
And then the last one is glucose support supplements. So anything that can regulate your blood sugar for containing metformin.
People are putting metformin, the type 2 diabetic medication.
Yes. I think it was like 15 or 16 supplements, which you look at the grand scheme, that's not a ton, but it actually they shouldn't contain metformin.
It'll be fun to see back on at the end of 2024 when we're doing this episode going into 2025, what new things. But we got a doozy today. We got a big old doozy today. We're talking about fat loss. We're setting up for cutting because I think this is one of the goals where we talked about this in the previous week as far as what the top New Year's resolutions were. I think just top ongoing goals for most people. Weight loss, fat loss is up there for everybody at some point in time, if not an ongoing trend. So this is a big problem that a lot of people have to conquer. And not only today do we want to just focus on how to set up a successful dieting phase to get you down to whatever weight loss or fat loss goal you have. This is the big problem that we see most as coaches and in this industry is people getting to the goal, but not through the goal. And I think the best way I've heard this described is a goal to or a goal through. And we're going to talk about goal setting, and we just had a whole episode on it last week. But we're not going to just focus this episode on how to get to whatever fat loss goal you have, but how to get through it. What happens next? I'm going to lose 20 pounds, and then what? Keep it off, maintain it. Feel like you don't have to track every gram of food going into your mouth for the whole life. There's a lot that we want to go through everything. And that's where we continually see people misstep or miscalculate. Yeah. That's at least what I see. Would you agree where you see most people just completely disregard that portion, the exit strategy?
All the time. And I do want to mention too first, don't rule out, because we're honing in on fat loss and you'll understand why we're honing in on fat loss versus weight loss. But if you're someone sitting here like, oh, well, I have more of a weight loss goal. No, you're right. You're in the right place. This is for you. This is also for you. So don't rule that out right away just because you think that maybe this is completely different from weight loss. You're in the right place.
You're in good hands. You're in good hands. Take our hands. We'll be your guide. But before we get into exactly why, because there's a lot of people that set up different weight loss and cutting goals for a lot of different reasons. A lot of it is aesthetically based. You want to look better. You want to get abs. You want to be able to take your shirt off at the beach, whatever it might be. A lot of it is aesthetically driven, not for good or bad reasons. And looks are cool. But before we jump into setting everything up, I do want to reiterate how important of like more of a health issue this can kind of be. It's really a lot more than just looks. There is a massive systematic review that we've covered before with over 900,000 participants looking at body fat levels and all-cause mortality, something that we like to draw to a lot in a lot of our episodes. All-cause mortality just being death from all causes as you age and the risk of that. And what they noticed is a 10%, or for every 10% increment in body fat, the risk of all-cause mortality increases by 11% in adults. So every 10% increased increment of body fat, your risk of all-cause mortality or death from all causes as you age increases by 11%. And another way that can translate over to is an increased 6% risk for every extra 5 kilograms of fat you hold, or about 11 to 12 pounds of fat you hold. Your increased risk of all-cause mortality goes up by 6%. So it's not just a looks thing, it's a longevity thing, which we've talked about a lot.
Yeah, and to put into perspective that it's not just a looks thing, this isn't, we're talking about, the statistics are on body fat percentage specifically. This isn't a BMI, just using a BMI chart. So when you think about body fat percentage and how you can really understand the mechanism behind why this is happening, it's because body fat localized around your viscera, around your organs, inhibits their ability to function at their peak and most optimal capacity. So the more body fat you have around your internal organs, the more at risk you are for disease. So that visceral fat, you can't even see that. You cannot even see visceral fat. So it's not just a looks piece. So I just wanted to put that kind of into perspective.
It makes total sense when you think about it. It's not just an aesthetic thing, because a lot of people will try and justify being very overweight, which there's nothing wrong with, but it's not healthy when you look at it. And not even just that, but I mean, past that, when you lose fat, you're decreasing your risk of chronic diseases, certain cancers, but you improve not just your lifespan, but your health span. That thing we talked about, your quality of life, what you're able to actually do in life. Your body is more capable to just do things, right? You sleep better, you feel better, you have better sex, you have lower healthcare costs. There's been so many research papers looking at how much your healthcare costs go down year after year. Because one of the common, I guess, rebuttals against losing weight and making it so hard is that it's expensive. Eating healthy is expensive. All of it's expensive. And I can almost see where you make that argument in incremental with groceries, if you have a family, things like that. But at the end of the day, the cost long-term over your lifetime is going to be exponentially larger if you're at an overweight, obese level of body fat. It just, in the moment, it might feel more expensive, but over a lifetime, it's not. It just dwarfs the cost of being healthy in the moment. And I think that's at least I hear that a lot. I don't know if it's still a thing. Do you still hear that?
Yeah, I mean, just cooking, like, food is just expensive now in general. Like, it is just, anything. Food is so expensive. Like, it is so expensive. And I feel like it's getting more expensive just to purchase food versus, so of course, obviously eating healthier is going to be more expensive, but the cost of all food has gone up. It's being a little bit smarter about it. But eating out is expensive. I really don't think, like, feeding yourself nowadays is just expensive. So in the long term, it's going to be cheaper to cook food for yourself and be a little bit more mindful of it.
It's honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, almost cheaper now to eat better and eat at home. Even we go to McDonald's once a year, probably 2 years. My roommate and I just moved out with each other. And a common thing is we are idiots and we load up all of our moving to do in one single day. And we don't get done until like after midnight that night moving. We're exhausted, we're beaten down. And to celebrate, we'll go get McDonald's. So we just did that because we just moved out about 2 weeks ago. First time I've had it in like 2 freaking years since the last time we moved. Still bomb. I'm not going to lie. It was banging. Big Mac's always going to hit. But it was almost $18 for like a Big Mac, some nuggets, a fries, and a drink. It was almost $20. Yeah. It was almost, that's not cheap. I could not afford to eat at McDonald's every day.
A sweet green meal for me. I spend like $19-20 when I get sweet green, which is like a salad.
But I'm like, you eat at home, you get some chicken. You actually learn how to do that through the episode we did on how to meal prep everything there. And you're spending a quarter of that. It might be, I might redact what I just said. It might be cheaper to eat at home and eat better. So if you're using that excuse, get that out of your lexicon. Get that out of here. Now, before we set up each step, because we got 5 steps on actually setting it up that you need to consider in getting yourself successful. How we communicate our goals is arguably one of the more important things that we do and where we take aim at. And the first thing we want to discuss, which we've talked about before, but not in a long time, is the idea of just weight loss in general, and how a lot of people, that is just their goal, is to lose weight or to lose 20 pounds, 30 pounds, whatever it might be, but not realizing that there is a massive difference between weight loss and fat loss, a massive, massive difference. And the route that you take to get to each one of those looks very, very different. And that's why it's important to specify what is really your goal. And we're going to probably shout this out 10 times through this episode to go listen to the previous week's episode on goal setting, because we agreed that was top 5 most important episodes of the year last year.
Yeah, for sure.
It can't go understated. But in how specific you are in setting up your goal, because you can categorize all of your body weight into one of 2 categories, either lean body mass or fat mass. Those are the 2. Fat mass is just simply all the weight that comes from body fat. That's it. Where lean body mass is the rest of it, everything else that is not coming from fat. So you'd figure out your body fat by just taking out your body fat percentage and then just laying that up against your body weight to figure out how much of me is fat. So if I'm 200 pounds and I am 15% body fat, I'm carrying about 30 pounds of fat mass, which would mean the rest, 170 pounds, is lean body mass. So lean body mass, even though it's referred to almost interchangeably with muscle from some people, I don't know if you see that, but on social media, a lot of people just refer to it almost as just muscle. But it's not just muscle. This includes the weight of your muscle, bones, ligaments, tendons, organs, other tissue, and even water. It is just, period, the end. Everything that's not fat in your body makes up lean body mass. Although when you see meaningful changes over time, so not day-to-day and water weight fluctuations, but meaningful changes in lean body mass over time, that typically comes from muscle, because you can't really significantly change the weight of your bone, ligament, any of those organ tissues significantly over time. Right?
You don't want to change the weight of your bone. That means you've got some osteoporosis.
A little osteoporosis, or your bones might get denser, but it's not going to tip the scale anytime soon. But the approach to lose weight oftentimes includes losing lean body mass. And that's a problem. Okay, that's a big problem, because muscle is one of the most important aspects of your body and a healthy metabolism you can really hold on to. It's powerful, right? So when you lose lean body mass when it comes from muscle, your metabolism is decreasing, how many calories you're burning a day, your energy through the day. So just how you feel is going to be empty. Okay, like just fatigue 24/7 when you start to lose more muscle. And there's even a correlation between muscle mass loss and the onset of depression and anxiety. It's not something you want to do. And this isn't even touching on the fact that you're seeing an increased risk in chronic diseases, hospital visits, injuries, compromised immune function. Muscle's important in almost every metric of health. So the goal that you should always have and specify. So this is even for, like you said at the beginning, the people that were like, I just want to lose 50 pounds, then I can worry about fat loss. Your goal should always be fat loss, not just weight loss. Meaning you should lose fat while holding on to and prioritizing, if not building, muscle mass at the same time. And there's 2 very different approaches to each of these goals, from what your workout should look like, to what diet should look like, to what the rest of your life should look like. So really the question is, do you want to lose weight or do you want to lose fat? And once you decide that you want to lose body fat, the next good question I think most people need to realize is, should you? Not just can you, but should you? How do you tell if it's the right time to actually go through this? Because a lot of people are like, yeah, I want to lose weight. I want to lose weight. But there's kind of 2 sides to this coin. The physical side of if you're ready to lose fat, and then the mental side, which a lot of people don't talk about as much.
Going into the mental aspect, and this is so important, and I wish more people talked about it, because this is a commitment. If you are setting this goal and you're setting it up right, this is going to be a mental commitment that you have to take on the load of. Yeah. Are you in a place where you could do that? Do you feel like you're in a place where you could take on a large mental load that this process is? What do I mean by that? That could mean so many things. How is your mental health right now? You can have things going on, don't get me wrong, but do you have good processes in place to deal with your anxiety, your depression, your stress, what you're dealing with in your day-to-day life? Because that, your mental health This has got to come first. It's always has to come first, or else this is not going to be a long game, because there are going to be times where your mental health is going to falter during this process. And you want to be able to have the tools to pick yourself up and not let this completely just fall on the back burner and be something that you can't take on anymore. This shouldn't be something to deter anyone. It's just something to think about before you start. This is a simple concept, but the execution is very complex, and it is a journey for sure. Also, considering this is a mental component of it, but you need to consider your relationship with food. Where are you at with how you view eating? Do you have any past lingering issues from an eating disorder? Do you have some disordered eating tendencies? Do you feel like food controls you versus you being in control of your food choices? This is something that even if you think you're good, your relationship is great, a lot of the times things will come up and you realize, oh, wait, I have a lot more food rules than I thought I did. I have a lot more fears, a lot more worries. And you got to address those first. You can still have this goal of fat loss, but now let's wedge in a goal of improving our relationship with food first, because it will not be a successful process if your relationship with food is shit. It sounds cliche, but it's really, really important to address before starting this process. And it's kind of a slippery slope, because food and tracking and exercise, all an important integral component of the process. And it's something that you don't want to look at as you start to hate it. I could talk on and on about this, about specific food rules and signs, but that's not what the purpose is. I think you can really, like an action plan, I would say, is just sit down, be super honest with yourself, and make a list of any food. And I say exercise rules as well, because some people have an unhealthy relationship with exercise and are really afraid to lift weights because they don't want to get bulky. Like, that's an example of you have these mental hurdles in place that are not going to allow you to
needing to
execute
punish
your goals.
yourself with cardio because you ate something extra or out of plan. Because people always say it's like 80% nutrition, 20% training, it's 90% nutrition, whatever. They'll give it and just chalk it up to those two, but they never talk about the mental game. And you don't realize when you're in a calorie deficit, you're putting stress on your body. So stress on your body, you're going to feel that mentally. So if you're already super stressed or holding a lot up there in your head, that's adding more on top of it. Training is, although people usually say it's a good stress, it's still stress. So if you are already holding a lot from your diet, from your life, from everything else, and you're just piling more on top, it can end in a fiery explosion, is what you're saying. If you don't consider it, or at least take it as important. It's huge. So from the mental side, it's hard to say, okay, I know I want to lose weight, but I need to focus on this first. That's a hard thing to do. That requires a lot. And the second piece of this is the physical aspect of if you are ready to. Even if your goal in the long run is to lose weight or to lose fat, that doesn't mean you should necessarily start by cutting. Because first, you have to realize muscle, one, does burn more calories at rest compared to fat. It's not the most significant number in the world. It's about 6 to 7 calories per pound of muscle at rest during a day compared to 2 calories per pound of fat. It's not the most significant difference, but that amounts to about 100, 150 calories a day, which can add up to about 700 to 1,400 calories a week, over 36,000 calories a year when you add small things like that up, if you just have a little bit more muscle. And I think the second piece, because people always chalk it down to like, oh, you know what, muscle is not that much more metabolically active. The second thing is it helps you burn more calories each day because you're using more fuel to do every movement through the day with more muscle. I think people forget about that oftentimes. With every step you take, with every action through the day, during your workouts, you are going to be burning more because you can lift heavier weights. You can do bigger exercises like squats, deadlifts that are burning so much more than something you can do without muscle. So while the resting metabolic rate increase from muscle mass alone might not be enormous, the overall impact of having more muscle on your total daily energy expenditure, how many calories you burn in a day, which we'll talk about later, can be very significant. So if you're someone who's never worked out, but you do have weight to lose, you have to realize the more calories you're able to burn through the day, the more food you're able to eat and still lose fat. And what we're going to get into later is that will largely predict how successful something is. The less restrictive you can be, the more food you can eat and still lose weight, the less the odds are that you're going to fall, collapse, crash, and then restart the cycle. So if you have little to no muscle mass, it might make more sense to stay at maintenance or even enter a slight calorie surplus to build a decent amount of muscle before entering into a fat loss phase. So the odds of you actually succeeding to keep your progress increase. So if you're someone who's like, I do need to lose 20, 30 pounds, but I don't have much muscle, I don't think you really realize until you go through it how much easier a fat loss phase is with muscle than it is without. A lot of clients have gone through this. I've gone through it personally. It is exponentially easier when you have a little bit more muscle compared to when you don't. So there's just some things that you got to consider before actually going into a deficit. And it's a hard thing to do, knowing that you want to lose weight and saying, okay, maybe this is going to take longer than the next couple months that I had planned on, but guess what? It's going to work. Like, it's going to actually work this time instead of just sitting in the cycle, restarting every year. So once you decide that you're in a good place to do so, let's get to the meat and potatoes. We got 5 steps that we're going to set up to get you there. This is going to be foolproof. If you can do these 5 steps, and this is honestly what we go through with clients, and you don't need a coach to do it. A coach puts this structure in place. It just takes a little bit more effort on your end. But if you do these 5 things, you will be successful. Starting off, number 1, and this one's not going to seem as sexy, but number 1, before you even step foot in the gym,
just setting a fat loss goal. And you want to be specific here. So yeah, your goal is to lose fat. Good, awesome, got it. But you want to narrow that down a lot more. We have our whole goal setting episode that we just did 2 weeks ago. You can refer to that for how to set really solid goals. But before you get specific, you want to name your why. So why do I want to lose fat? Should be driven by something that is internal for you, not for anyone else. Don't need to get into the nitty-gritty of that, but make sure you have a solid why, because that's going to push you through. So many people don't know why they're doing what they're doing, and this is going to help you play that long game. But then when it comes to setting a specific fat loss goal, you want to start by determining what your body fat percentage is, and then the body fat percent that you're trying to get down to. So an example of this could be you weigh 180 pounds and you're 25% body fat and you want to get down to 15%. So you got around 10% body fat to lose. You'd need to lose around 18 pounds to get there. We have our calculators all on our website, and they'll be linked down below to help you do that so you don't have to do all the math for yourself. But this is just a good example of how specific you should be. And then you want to see what actions or tasks that you need to complete, maybe daily, weekly, and monthly to get there. So figuring out how much weight you would need to lose a week is going to be really helpful. So getting even more specific, if you want to lose around 0.5% body fat each week, and Tony's going to talk a little bit more about kind of how you should determine how much you want to lose, how fast you want to lose it. But for this example, that'd be around 1 pound a week. Then you could divide that total number of pounds you want to lose by how much you want to lose each week. So for this example, that would take around 18 weeks. So you can get time specific. And now, because I have this set fat loss goal and the time frame for how I'm going to do it, what that looks like each week, I can get in smaller actionable goals. How many calories should I be eating a day in order to get to that 1 pound of weight loss a week? So what should my deficit be? What should my protein goal be? We get even more specific. Yes. I'm going to make sure that I adhere to this protein goal and calorie deficit that I have by taking my Sunday to meal prep lunch and dinner for the week. Or you can start a little bit slower to just meal prep lunch with 1 meal. And then the next part of this is going to be within your goal, taking into account what your exit strategy should be. So we are setting the specific fat loss goal, but what do I do once I hit it? What do I do after
strategy
that?
Is massive.
Yeah. So we are going to go into detail much more about that, but make sure that you are considering that in your goal setting.
The goal through, not the goal to, is the big thing. Because this is why it's step 1. We can promise that we can give you the training, the nutrition, the everything else. If you don't do step 1 correctly, I'd bet my savings that you won't make it. Like, clear and simple. You don't get what you don't specifically aim at. So if you're not spending more than 2 minutes thinking about what your goal is, and that's what we spent an hour and a half last
talking about.
If you're not spending more than 2 minutes on setting your goal, I can promise you will not make it. I will bet against you every single time. So you have to set it up. And the second step to this is going to be dialing in your training and movement, which actually is the step that comes before nutrition. I'm not saying it's more important than nutrition, But it makes a lot more sense once we break this down of why you want to set this up first before you actually look at your nutrition. So step number 2, after you have a goal in mind, is to dial in and see what you can get out of your training and movement. Because we're going to talk about what a calorie deficit is, aka the one thing that's been consistent in the last 100 years of research in any successful weight loss trial. A calorie deficit has been present. That's the only one thing that will and has to be present every single time. But people usually think about a calorie deficit in terms of eating less food, and they forget about the other side of the puzzle, which is how many calories you are burning in a day. And there's a lot you can do to actually increase that. So when it comes to the training aspect before the movement, correct me if I'm wrong, I think most people, when they think about losing weight, the first place their mind goes is cardio. And they think of weight training as more of something that's bulking up. I think that idea is going away, but it's still present. I think it's still present. And we're going to tell you why that's probably the most wrong thing you could think about if your goal is fat loss, not just weight loss. And actually, when you look at the larger amounts of research, it shows that most people actually will end up fatter or heavier than when they began their exercise routines, when they specifically just aim at cardio, when you stretch things out over years. So when that's your focus, is just burning calories and not getting fit, it's usually going to end you with your wheels spinning. Because that's what the problem is when you're just focused on cardio, is all you're caring about is calories. Calories, calories, calories. And calories matter, but they're not all that matter. What we want to set you up for is to get the most out of your movement and out of your training to set you up successful. So you can eat more food, so you can be more successful. And honestly, like, who just doesn't like eating more food? It's usually, one, more enjoyable, but two, your body generally likes it more. And that's what we want to dial in here. So if you're just focused on, it makes sense why people would think that. An hour of cardio will burn more calories than an hour of weight training. Every time, almost any kind of cardio, almost any style of weight training, you're probably going to burn more calories in that 1 hour doing cardio than you will weight training in that singular hour. But that's where people only look at the first order of consequences, not the second order. First order is what directly happens from that. You burn these calories in the hour. Okay. But what happens because of that, right? The second order of business. It's not building your metabolism like weight training is. It's going to decrease your capacity to burn more calories over time while training, while weight training is going to increase it. So your actual calorie burn during that hour is going to get lower and lower, where in weight training, it can get higher and higher. And there's a few specific studies that we plucked out to really highlight this in action, because we can tell you all day, but here's a specific example. The first one is just a simple 2-group study done at the University of West Virginia. And the research just put participants into 2 separate groups, and they put both groups on a very low calorie liquid diet for 12 weeks. And they do a liquid diet to control the dietary aspect. You can guarantee these people are drinking X amount of calories because it's controlled in a liquid form given to them, rather than just diet recall or saying, hey, eat 2,000 calories over here. It's hard because human error exists. And if you don't track food, you don't realize it's a skill, it's easy to waver on. So this is how they controlled that. Now, the only difference between the groups is group 1 was assigned as a cardio group. They did 4-hour-long cardio sessions per week. The second group was the weight training group. They were assigned to 3-hour-long weight training workouts per week. So even a little bit less total time for the weight training group. Now, at the end of the 12 weeks, the cardio group lost the most weight. And people are like, wait a second, this makes sense. Cardio is the best for weight loss. The cardio group lost the most weight, but they also lost 9 pounds of lean body mass and muscle in the process, and their resting metabolic rate actually decreased. Okay, so at the end of the 12 weeks, did they lose the most weight? Yes, but 9 pounds of the weight they lost was from muscle and lean body mass, and their resting metabolic rate actually decreased in the process. When you look at the weight training group, the group that only did weight training, they lost the most body fat. So they didn't lose the most total weight on the scale, but when you actually measure out body composition, they lost more fat than the cardio group. They lost no lean body mass in the process, and their resting metabolic rate actually increased, meaning they're burning more calories at rest than they did when they started the study after weight training for 12 weeks. And you're like, well, okay, it's not a black and white world. That's where this study from Duke University added a third group, a weight training group, a cardio group, and then a group who did both. And this is a little skewed because the group that did both ended up doing the total time that the cardio group did on cardio and the total time the weight training group did on weight training. And it was an 8-month study. Now, at the end of the study, if you want to guess who lost the most weight, it was the cardio group. Again, the cardio group lost the most weight out of anybody, but they're also the only group that lost muscle as well. Guess who lost the most fat and gained the most muscle? It was actually the combination group. The group who did weight training and cardio lost the most body fat and actually gained muscle by the end of this study. So it's not a black and white world, but weight training should be the heart and soul, the beating drum of your program when you're trying to do this. Now, I think it's important, and I would almost structure it where I really only recommend out of all of your training time, so hours in the gym per week, that at least 75% is coming from weights and no more than 25% is coming from cardio. If your goal is specifically fat loss.
Do you include like walking in cardio?
The answer is
daily movement?
It depends, because daily movement's a big piece of it. What you have to think about is how much you actually enjoy your training, because this isn't results that are going to happen days or weeks, but months this is going to take. So if you don't enjoy it, if you hate cardio and that's all you're doing, I would bet that your willpower is not going to last more than a month, maybe 2.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not going to last out. So you have to actually take into account how much you're enjoying this. Now, I'll be honest with myself, with clients, we can get to 90% of their goal for fat loss by just focusing on increasing their daily step count, their daily movement, and only adding in structured cardio, some more HIIT or LISS at the end of like their actual weight training sessions towards the end to get that last 10%. It's not an exact number, but that's where I usually notice it, is to get to the final little chug after a few weeks or months of being really consistent with everything else. That's when you really start to notice you might need that little extra push. And I know this is going to get a lot of drawback because people love pounding in cardio. They love it. And when you're setting up what cardio you specifically want to do, there's a lot of different forms. And I just want to kind of clear this out because we've talked about this on different episodes. I wouldn't say there's a best form of cardio to add in once you get to that point. Like the bottom line is the less cardio you can do while still reaching your weight loss goals, generally the better because of all the benefits you get from weight training. But as you start to add in cardio and the further you get along your journey, it usually gets chalked up to HIIT and LISS, high intensity interval training, or low intensity steady state, like walking. And there's this kind of back and forth battle, and low intensity, the LISS, is where a lot of people are now obsessed with the quote unquote fat burning zone, which we've talked about before, but we're going to touch on today too. Usually I'd say first, look at what you actually enjoy the most. And I used to be in the camp of HIIT training, high intensity interval training, emphasis on used to be, because HIIT is going to burn more calories per minute than steady state cardio. High intensity interval training, you're going to burn more calories per minute than that steady state. So it seems like the better option. But the things that you have to think about, the second order consequences, is not just how many calories you're burning, but that HIIT is going to cause more fatigue, which if you're in a calorie deficit, you're already going to be dealing with some sort of daily fatigue. So you're just stacking more on top of that. It's going to actually cause muscle damage, especially if you're doing really high intensity intervals like sprints. You're causing muscle damage and it takes longer to recover from. And I know this is hit or miss in the research, but I've noticed with most people, it actually increases your hunger a lot more than low intensity things do, like walking. You're getting excited over there. You're getting excited.
I'm getting excited.
But those are the things that people don't realize.
So true. And I know this is just my experience. I can't speak for everyone, but the HIIT and sprinting, I used to be a big Barry's boot camp goer. So like that was so intense, so much sprinting, like insane what it was doing to my body. I still can't even fathom the fact that I used to do it. But my hunger, insatiable. Like I couldn't turn it off ever, never. Yeah. I was never not hungry. Even going to the gym, working out, like you are going to be more hungry than the average person who is not active. That's just general. Like your appetite's going to increase, whatever. But it was just insatiable. And then once I stopped doing that and really focused on low intensity and strength training, it was insane. Like the fact that I don't think about eating and my stomach isn't telling me to eat food like 24/7 is crazy. And obviously there's multiple things that could go into that, but that was a huge difference for me.
Because people don't think about that. They think of first order consequences, which is, if I do 20 minutes of HIIT versus 20 minutes of steady state, I could burn an extra 100 calories.
Yeah.
But if you're not thinking the fatigue, the added recovery, how much more hungry that's going to make you, it is not hard to eat 100 calories. It's not. So if you're going to work that extra hard to burn an extra 100 calories, but that's going to cause you to eat 500 more calories, you're doing more harm than good. Okay. That's where it comes down to, that you have to consider, where low intensity things like increasing your step count, how many daily walks you're taking, adding an incline speed walk at the end of your gym. Generally, and this is not, I've seen both camps of this, so I'm not saying it's perfect or one way or the other. I've seen people who get hungrier from lower intensity cardio. The majority I've seen don't. But if you're just focused on increasing your step count and things like that, one, that doesn't rack up fatigue. It's not going to increase your hunger most of the time, and it doesn't take anything to recover from. There's not a limit to how much you can be doing most of the time, unless you're doing like 20,000 plus steps a day. Now, like I said, for most of my clients, we get 90% of the way there just from focusing on increasing their step count from 7 to 10,000, from 10 to 12, making those incremental jumps than I think we ever would just trying to increase or add specific time for cardio, because honestly too, most people just don't enjoy it. And if you're listening to this and you don't enjoy cardio, don't beat yourself up for it. I know a lot of people on the fitness side of Instagram are like, yeah, cardio sucks. That's why you got to do it. You don't have to do excessive amounts. You don't to get there. And then once you do, you can add things in. And the last piece of this too, because I know it's a big hot topic lately, is the special fat burning zone, the 12-3-30 workout. We did an episode on this. It was about the top 10 fitness scams a few months back. I don't know if you remember that one. If you can tell by the name, there's no merit to it at all. It does exist. They're talking about fat oxidation, but that doesn't mean fat loss. And that's where we make that separation. Without going into it, like TLDR, don't need to listen to it. You do not need to spend a second thinking about whether or not you're in a fat burning zone while you're training. Don't. It's a waste of time, waste of energy. So bottom line for cardio, the less cardio you can do while still reaching your weight loss goals while weight training, generally going to be better. Now, when it comes to setting up your weight training, we're going to actually link these two down below because we've covered this extensively in multiple other episodes. We do have an episode on how to build a training program, but I would almost more reference you to episode 77 or 90, where we're actually building out training splits, like the full body and the PPL training split. And we actually are going to teach you how to build your own through that process and what you should actually be paying attention to. But for the best results, you're generally doing about 3 to 5 hours of heavy compound weightlifting per week, anywhere from 45 to 60 minutes a session while implementing progressive overload. Okay, so all the other intricacies will have to do with your individual goals. And that's where we talk about it more in those episodes, that we don't want to spend another hour on this episode talking about it. But that's what's going to matter, is that you're taking up 3 to 5 hours of mostly heavy, more compound movement weight training if you can. And compound movement, not meaning squats, deadlifts, but those movement patterns if you need to regress because you can't quite do them yet. Yeah. And I will put this on before we move on to step number 3, which is setting up your diet, which is going to be probably the most important key to this whole thing. And it's a mistake I see a lot of people make in their weight training when they're going from a bulk to a cut, or when they start thinking about fat loss, is they transition from lifting heavy weights for lower repetitions, like low to moderate, to very lightweight, low rest time, and very high repetition movements. They get rid of the thing that got them the muscle, that got them the strength in the first place, and replace it with almost, in a sense, making weight training into cardio. Do you still see that? Because that's a mistake I see a lot of people still make.
Yeah, I actually do. I never really thought about because I do address, I think about it often, but I feel like not many people ever talk about that. Like, I see it come up all the time, but for some reason it's not the first thing I think. Yeah.
And that's, and just to dispel this, because what you're going to learn in those sessions is your weight training. And this is what we had Bill Campbell on a long time ago too, described it really well. Your weight training should be the heartbeat of your training through. You shouldn't be making massive changes to it. You shouldn't be swinging, oh, it's bulking season, I need to completely change up my game plan. No, you don't. You should keep the same game plan, because the thing that got you the strength and got you the muscle in the first place is what is going to best keep it when you're losing weight. So if you get rid of that and you start going all high rep, get your heart rate up, low rest time, low recovery, all you're doing is turning your weight training into cardio, which we just talked about. You don't want to make up the majority of your session. If anything, you should double down on heavier, more strength focused training, because that's what's going to keep your muscle, if not build it while you're in a calorie deficit, what we're going to talk about next. So I thought that was an important point to touch on, because that is, I'm going to say, the most common mistake I see people make when changing their training routine structured around this.
For sure.
And now it gets time for the fun part. Everyone's favorite, right? We can go beat ourselves to the ground in the gym 5-6 hours a week, but you want me to meal prep? You want me to Do
How
what?
annoying is that? It's
So
like
annoying.
it's like, that's the easy part. It's not easy, but when you look at the
Yeah.
greater picture, that is the easy part. Diet, it's fucking hard. Eating at a deficit, but it's hard. And there's ways to make it easier, obviously.
And most people spend more effort designing their training and getting the most out of that than they do on their nutrition, because I think it's a little more boring to most people, as it feels more boring. It's not as fun. It's not an activity where you see it. And I think we just lay this out for people listening too. You can successfully lose weight and lose fat without training a minute during the week if your diet is structured correctly. The same does not go in reverse for weight training and diet. You can't out-train a bad diet. You've heard that a million times. It's because it's true.
Yeah.
Like if you have energy and effort, you should allude most of it to this. The rest matters, but this is what's going to determine whether or not you make progress.
Yeah. And so it obviously, like, finding out step 3 is finding out where you need to be nutritionally. And I'm sure most of you know this already. Like, if you want to lose fat, you're going to have to eat in a deficit. Like, calorie deficit is plunged down everyone's throat. And I think we throw around what a calorie deficit is and just use it a lot in verbiage and don't actually explain it. But just in the most simple terms, a calorie deficit is taking in less energy than you spend in a day. And it's measured in the form of food and drink that you consume in calories.
And then the calories that you're spending, which isn't just through activity, through your workouts, but made up of something called your TDEE. So your basal metabolic rate, how much you're moving through the day, your actual workouts, how much you're burning through the digestion process, which we'll even link that episode down below if you want a better understanding of your metabolism or how many you're spending in a day. Yeah. We have to set up a calorie deficit.
But how to set that up and how to do it correctly, and also so that you're not miserable and that it's accurate for you, is really important to pay attention to. And that's something people don't talk about as often. So a good starting place that Tony and I usually will advise people to go is kind of first, before you try and figure out what your calorie goal even is, or protein, whatever, determine how much you're currently eating. Get a baseline, get a starting point. And this is going to add more time. It's not this quick process. So we never said it would be, but 2 to 3 weeks. 2, it could be enough. 3 is going to be even better, but track what you're normally eating. Get an idea of how many calories you're eating to stay at around a maintenance weight. Your weight isn't fluctuating much. You can also understand you're tracking, but then you're going to start to have some experience with tracking, especially if it's your first time, without the pressure of having this really like a strict goal to stick to. So you get to learn the ins and the outs there. You can also look at any micronutrient insufficiencies. So you can look at your diet as a whole, not just how many calories, but how much protein am I actually eating? How much fiber? How many vitamins and minerals am I getting? This is going to give you a really, really good starting place for a good direction to hone in on specific nutrition goals that are going to be geared towards fat loss, but also just overall health as well. So you can get a lot out of knowing where you're starting from. And there's no shame in if you're not eating any fiber during the day, if your protein is a lot less, or if you're eating a lot more, there's no shame in that at all.
You know that though, like not that it's a good thing to not be eating fiber, but it's a good thing that you now know that. It's huge. And
why I put in the note of kind of without your weight changing. So getting an idea of week to week, seeing, okay, like over the course of 3 weeks, my weight hasn't changed on average. If you understand your maintenance calories, that's going to be so helpful for a deficit, because if you, on a lot of calculators or just using a general basic equation, someone's maintenance may be much higher than the next person's, but you might get from that calculator a super, super low calorie goal. So not looking at your starting point, looking at a starting point that they have set for you based off of population data. So that's why a lot of the times people will get thrown this you should be eating 1,200 calories a day, but you've been at maintenance eating 2,600. And so you have this huge deficit, and it's crazy. So this is just going to give you an more accurate picture there.
Because this is where, I think our calculator is, I know just because of building it out, going to be a little bit more accurate because it's unbiased, but it's going to be more accurate because we still took more data points than any calculator that at least I'm aware of into account for estimating your daily energy expenditure, how many calories you
Yeah.
burn in a day. We did. But at the end of the day, we only took into account about 10 to 12 different data points, where most calculators are 7 to 8. Guess how many things influence how many calories you burn in a day? In the dozens, maybe up to 100 different things influence your calorie maintenance. So even the best calculator in the world can't account for your hormone profile, your sleep quality, a lot of these other aspects that your genetics that calculators cannot and will never be able to account for. So this is the most important thing. And sorry to draw this, I love this analogy, is it's in goal setting. If you know exactly where point A and point B are, where you are and where you want to be, it is easy to connect those two dots. And most people might spend a good amount of time defining where they want to go, point B, but they will spend 0 minutes on defining where they are. If I told you to connect two dots and you look at the page and there's only one dot, you're like, how do I do that? Where's the other dot? So you don't know. Good luck though. You can't do that.
Yeah.
And defining where your maintenance is by just tracking without the intent to change can seem like you're wasting time. I know that's one of the, like, if a client that I start working with is ready to start tracking calories, if they're at a good place to start tracking, that'll be the first thing that kind of shakes them. Is I'm like, okay, cool. Don't change a thing that you're eating. If you normally eat pizza and a margarita on Friday night, cool, eat it. Just track it. Track the good, track the bad, because that will paint you a crystal clear picture of where you are starting from. So you know exactly the changes you need to make. Because, and I'll tell you, a lot of the time, it's not as many changes as most people think. Rather than just using a calculator, completely changing your diet, changing everything about it, which usually doesn't last for more than a few weeks. So that's where I'm like, we just got to emphasize how important that part is, defining where you are starting from.
Yeah.
Before setting a goal, that's the first thing you got to do in calories. It's huge. I'm so glad you touched on that point.
Yeah. And then next is going to be, and this is going to be I'm just going to refer you to our TDEE calculator. It's our calorie calculator as well. You'll get both in there, but that's on our website. It's going to be really helpful, but you need to determine your TDEE, which is your total daily energy expenditure, which is an estimate of how many calories you're burning in a day. And Tony just touched on how variable that is and how many factors go into what makes that unique from person to person. But you need this in order to determine your calorie deficit. So again, I'm not asking you to do all the equations. That's going to be helpful from the calculator on our website. But what I do want to touch on for your TDEE is, while you're making this calorie goal from that information, look at different components that I'll go through that influence your total daily energy expenditure and see where you can adjust those to make it so that you can eat as much food as possible. So we do have an option on our website to kind of adjust your TDEE, right? And see that's how much more.
I love doing it, is because you can figure out where you are, but then you can use different calculations and buttons on there where if you change certain things, like adding a 10-minute walk after each meal, your TDEE was this, it would be up to this now. Or if you change certain aspects of your lifestyle, it helps you calculate out what it could be if you make these small changes. Because that's, again, what we talked about in the training movement thing. You want to see what you can get out of how much you're burning in a day, because that means you get to eat more food.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's really fun to play with on our website. Not to be annoying to keep plugging that, but it's so, so, so helpful. Tony made that, not me. So all recognition goes to him. But that is going to be huge. You want to be able to eat as much as possible. So those changing components of your total daily energy expenditure, NEAT, so non-exercise activity thermogenesis, you're going to get the most of that from adding in a walk, increasing protein, which should just be a goal already, strength training, which we already addressed. Those can all adjust your TDEE, and it can make a difference in what your overall calorie goal now is in a deficit still. So then from there, you want to determine your deficit. So 2 and 3, TDEE, calorie deficit, they all go hand in hand. What's really important is kind of thinking about pacing here. So yes, we need to be in a deficit, but how long do I want to take this deficit? And how fast can I do it so I can achieve my goal? Or what's the most realistic pace for me? Should I start on the lower end? Typically, I will recommend people to start in a smaller deficit, especially if it's your first time around, to kind of see, because you can always increase it. But I don't know if you want to talk about pacing.
Like the strategy between how aggressive you want to go. because it's
Yeah.
something you got to take into account. And this is where you got to leave your ego at the door. Because I think most people, I mean, it's like we're in kind of like a world of highlights. We want things quick. We want to achieve our goal as quickly as possible. When given the option to go more aggressive and get something quicker, or to go slower and get something slower, most people, without thinking about realistically what that looks like, will choose the more aggressive option. And that's usually, for most people, not the best. And there's this conversation between like, how aggressive do you want to go? And even this conversation of mini cuts, which is a popular thing in the bodybuilding world. And if you don't know what a mini cut is versus like a more normal or drawn out one, a mini cut typically only lasts about 4 to 6 weeks, maybe 8, like at the max, compared to a more typical cut, which can last anywhere from 24 to 36 weeks, a little bit longer, like months drawn out, going less aggressive. And because of how short that mini cut is, only 4 to 6 weeks, you can usually handle more aggressive cuts and harder training because you just don't have to do it for that long. You know what I'm saying? It's easy if you're dealing with hunger at night. It's easy to be like, okay, I can go to bed hungry because I know I'm only doing this for a couple more weeks, rather than I'm going to be doing this for the next few months. This is just what life looks like. It's easy to give up and willpower to just fall through. Now, in an aggressive mini cut, it takes your goal up, because we're going to talk about how fast we want to see progress from where you set your deficit. Typically, in a normal drawn out deficit, a good goal would be to lose anywhere from 0.5 to 1% of your total body weight per week. 1% on the more aggressive range, 0.5 on the more conservative range. So if you're 200 pounds, losing 1% of your body weight per week would be losing about 2 pounds per week. 0.5 would be 1 pound a week. Those are good goals to set. Anything faster is usually unsustainable, but that's where in a mini cut, since you're going a little bit harder in the training, harder in the cardio, and more aggressive in your calorie deficit, or a larger calorie deficit, you're usually aiming to lose about 1 to 1.25% of your total body weight per week during that mini cut. So it's more aggressive. Now, the main reason you would do one, before getting into who should do one, is to lose as much fat as possible in a short period of time, knowing that you won't have to sustain it. So you can take more diet breaks this way. It's more of a sprint and walk technique rather than like a slow jog technique, which is appealing to a lot of people's motivation. Now, they do this as well because when it is that short of a time frame, you can usually get away with a more aggressive deficit without losing muscle, without your hunger adjusting too much. You're going to be really hungry, but it's not going to actually adjust lower too much. And without your energy or fatigue starting to really, really drain you compared to a longer drawn out one. Now, the better points to use mini cuts are usually at like in the middle of a building or bulking phase. So when you've already gotten down to a low body fat percentage and now you're building mass, it's nice to use mini cuts to kind of tread it down. So let's say you get down as a man to 10% body fat. That's a good lower end to aim for. And you start bulking. Every time you get to 15%, it might make sense to do a little mini cut to drop down to 12, 13%. And then bulk up to 15, mini cut. Because bulking takes a lot longer than cutting does, what we've talked about before. So that's usually when it is best. But I would say when you shouldn't do it, which is most people, is one, if you have not had a more successful long-term diet period before, don't do this. Do not do this. I'm talking to you. If you're like, oh, but it seems better, it seems more like, don't. If you've not successfully done a more or like a less aggressive, longer one, do not. Because I'm telling you, like when your hunger gets dialed up, your stress gets dialed up, your sleep starts to dial down because this all happens during a mini cut, you will fail because you've never felt even half of that before during a longer drawn out one. So don't do that. When you wouldn't want to do this is also if you have a good amount of fat to lose. So men, if you're over 18%, women over 28%, it would make more sense to spread things out and go for a more long-term goal instead. And then another one when you wouldn't want to do this is when life gets busy, right? So maybe over the past 2 months when it's been the holidays and you're traveling, you got family over here, family over there, different Christmas parties, different whatever. That's not a good time to set up a mini cut because you have to be very consistent and aggressive because you're only doing it for 4 to 6 weeks. Every day matters. So if every weekend you're going out drinking, you're going out doing this, you're falling off your diet, you're not going to make any progress.
No.
Okay. That's not going to work. And what you got to watch out for, and this is where I typically see people who choose this without going through a longer one beforehand. This is where a yo-yo dieting cycle usually starts, is they see quick progress. They don't realize what they're getting themselves into. They rebound, and then it just goes back and forth. And a year from now, you might have gone through 3 or 4 successful diets, but you're going to look the exact same because you rebound. So aggressive wise, that's typically where you want to start. And that just is really determining how large of a deficit you need to be in. And the calculator we have online will help you determine, okay, if you want to lose 0.5%, 0.75%, 1% of your body weight per week, here's how many calories you should roughly be eating based on your TDE. So you want to adjust it based on how quickly you want to see progress most of the time.
I just want to briefly touch on a few ways to make a calorie deficit easier. Because
that's the biggest.
Go into this.
The hardest.
You can learn the hard way, but there are things that are just, it's going to make it easier across the board for anyone. But you want to establish a consistent routine with eating that goes from prep to time of day, but really making time for meal prep. So have a good routine. This is even planning. So there is a mental load that goes into thinking about what you are going to eat. Yeah. It is so easy to just rule it off and be like, oh, I really don't want to do this. I'll just figure it out the day that I'm eating. I'm just going to buy a bunch of crap and I'll just figure it out at the time of my meal. Don't do that. You are going to set yourself up for failure, especially when you're hungry and you're going to be hungry more often. Your choices that you're going to make when you are hungry are not going to be as great as they would be if you're not and you already have food ready. And I'm not saying prep every single meal, but maybe just start out with one, like always having lunch or always having dinner, and work your way up if you want to, if you find that you need to. It's going to depend on your schedule, of course. But even like if prepping entire meals isn't your thing, prep staples and portion them out in advance so you don't have to measure and use chronometer every single time you're going to cook or make food. It's like you already have your pre-portioned proteins and your veggies, and that could be your type of meal prep if you do not want to have these really specific meals, but just your staples like your carbs and your proteins. You have those prep for the week so you can just throw them together to make a meal and make your life a lot easier. Always having a backup plan is going to be helpful. So when you find time isn't really on your side, so that's like things like having your staples ready. So you always have some chicken waiting for you, or you always have some frozen foods like veggies, rice, proteins that you can make a really fast, easy meal, throw it together. So you always have options. You might not always have readily made meals that you just have to heat up and go, but you do have easy options in your freezer, in your fridge that you can throw together. That is going to absolutely save you. It's going to make things a lot easier. When you're in a deficit, you find that you're going to eat a lot of the same. Like you're not going to eat a different meal all of the time. You're going to find your staples. You're going to find what you like,
and you keep doing it because it works.
Yeah. So then you don't have to. You already know how many calories are in them. It's going to be a little bit easier to track. You can just, okay, I know this meal. I have it all the time. I'm just going to go re-enter it in Chronometer or MyFitnessPal or whatever you use. Just makes things a little bit easier. Going along with cooking, staples that you can have. I just remembered this, but have low-calorie sauces and things that can make your foods taste good. You don't need to just be pounding plain chicken. Like sugar-free barbecue sauce is delicious. It's low-calorie. I add that to literally everything, even though I'm not in a deficit. Like I use it with everything. Using cooking oil spray instead of dousing everything in oil. Having a lot of good seasoning blends.
And we've got all this too. We put together that meal prep essential Amazon list. Too.
Yes.
So if you want some ideas, you're like, where do I find these things? We put together a whole list that we'll put in the show notes below, because that stuff, you can save hundreds of calories, over 1,000 a day by doing things like that.
Yeah. So that's going to make a huge difference. And this kind of goes without saying, but you don't want to let your hunger get out of control. Like you really want to stay on top of that, especially in a deficit. Like always be prepared. If you're going to be out and about, like always have a protein bar on you or something quick and easy, because like once that hunger sets in, I don't know if you ever experienced this in a deficit, but sometimes it's like I had certain meals during the day, like I knew lunch or like between the hours of 2 and 5, like if I didn't have something, dinner was going to be a big problem. Like I was going to be like the end of the night, I would eat too much because I would get way too hungry. Like this is just personal. Like not everyone is going to feel like that. But if you are that type of person that, you know, if you miss your meal when you're in a deficit or if you miss your snack, like, oh shit my fan later.
There goes the whole day almost if you miss that one piece.
Yeah. So just being prepared. And this, again, these are examples of the mental load. There is a mental load here that you have to be thinking about that we talked about in the beginning. And then also, I made this note just because I feel like it's helpful, but just because something is labeled as healthy or you think you're eating healthy doesn't mean that you're eating for weight loss or fat loss. And it's one of the like really big reasons why people struggle to lose weight, because they have this preconceived notion that just because it's healthy, that means it's good for weight loss. So I just wanted to put that in there. I'm going to talk a little bit about it more in the end when we talk about your exit plan.
But I got it at Whole Foods. What do you mean it's not good for weight loss?
Your portion sizes still matter regardless of whether or not the food is healthy. It still matters. But something that's going to make it easier to eat in a deficit is eating a little bit more high volume foods. So eating foods that are lower in calorie density, higher in nutrient density. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but still prioritizing whole foods, which are quote unquote healthier foods, you could say, is going to make it easier in a deficit because they're more satiating. Typically, they can be a little bit lower in calories if you are focusing on whole foods versus processed foods. So not making processed foods the center of your diet, but
don't have to completely get rid of them, but you're going to be hungry if that's all you're eating is ultra processed foods. It's going to be, and we say this all the time, you can't beat hunger over time.
Yeah.
No one's ever beaten hunger. You cannot beat hunger. You might be able to push it off for a day, a week if you're really motivated. You got a wedding coming up. I've never over 10 years seen someone successfully beat hunger. And that's even when you're determining how aggressive you want to go in your deficit. So setting up, do I want to go in a 10% calorie deficit, a 20%, a 30% of how many fewer calories you want to be eating? Keep that in mind and test the waters, because we're going to talk about how you adapt coming up here in just a few minutes, which is equally as important. If you're noticing, especially right off the bat, excessive amounts of hunger, take care of that now, because if you just say, I'll figure it out, I'll do it better, and you end up binging or overeating on the weekends every time, that'll continue. You cannot, you will not beat hunger long-term. One way or the other, you cannot do it.
And then last but not least is you want to make sure you're setting up a protein goal. Not only is eating higher in protein going to make being in a calorie deficit easier, but this is essential in a fat loss phase, especially if you're trying to preserve your muscle mass as well. You have a strength training program in place. You want to make sure you are eating enough protein.
Our protein calculator is just going to give you a lot more specific number for you, and it gives you a range of a protein minimum and maximum you want to aim for a day. Because like if you've never aimed at eating protein, there's not many things harder than figuring out how to eat as much protein as you probably need. Because like a more specific numbers, I like to base it more off of lean body mass, not just total body weight. And there's a little bit of a range there. But if you're just starting out, and the calculator is going to give you like an optimal place to be, but if you're at like 50 grams a day and your window is from 130 to 180 grams, start by just trying to get the bottom end of that window. Figure out how you can structure your day, structure each meal, starting early with the first meal of the day. Figure out how to start there, and you can improve from there. It doesn't need to be a big jump. Right? Start small and add steps on top, but that'll give you a much more accurate number for you rather than us just saying a gram per pound of this, because everyone's so freaking different.
Yeah, it can be vague, but protein, what's it going to do? It's going to help with satiety and hunger, which is the biggest obstacle in the way of weight loss. And the research is very clear that protein is the most satiating food you can consume. It helps slow digestion and favorably alters your hormones related to hunger and fullness, like leptin and ghrelin. So it's going to be very helpful for a deficit. It helps preserve your muscle mass, and it also has the highest thermic effect of food compared to carbs and fats. The thermic effect of food is the amount of energy it takes for your body to digest, absorb, and metabolize the food you eat. So protein is a huge key player in fat loss. Do not ignore it. And hitting your protein goal, like sometimes is way harder than you think it can be. Even if this is like a starting point, if you are feeling very overwhelmed and you're a beginner for this, start by just setting a protein goal and build your meals around that, and then get into to just get you used to tracking a little bit, setting new nutrition behaviors and habits, and then get into your deficit. You don't have to do this all at once, but if you're looking at it nutritionally, I would say start with a protein goal if you want to start just getting your feet wet. If you're feeling overwhelmed, you're stressed out.
Yeah.
Because it's
a lot easier to fit into your life. It's a lot easier to wrap your head around and learn the skill of tracking just protein rather than everything that goes into it. And it's going to give you usually the biggest bang for your buck. I have two questions for you too. One is, would you say, and based on just like the setting up your calorie deficit, tracking your deficit, do you need to track your food in an app like MyFitnessPal, like Chronometer, to be successful here?
Not everyone does, but some people do. I would say it depends on the person. everyone can benefit from getting an idea of how much a certain portion of food looks like. This is your desired serving of chicken. This is what this should look like. I think it can be really helpful to understand that. But I know people hate it. I know people have had experiences where it's led to a really poor relationship with food and it's been too restricting, or some people, their schedules, it's just too time consuming. So focusing on portions, focusing on how to build your plate, focusing on eating those more high volume meals, and looking at just making changes to how you build each meal every day can be really helpful. Some people, it's a little bit easier. Some people, it's a little bit harder. I would say it really depends on the person. What do you think?
Yeah. The difference really comes down to guessing versus knowing at the end of the day. When it comes to track, you don't need to track. If you eat in a calorie deficit, you don't have to track it to eat that, right? If you eat a piece of chicken every day, you're going to be in a calorie deficit. You don't need to track that. So you'll still lose weight. But at the end of the day, it comes down to guessing versus knowing.
It's still a guessing game.
Yeah. Where tracking is a massive tool because it teaches you about food, yes, but it's more of guaranteeing. It's kind of like the financial analogy when it comes to tracking your finances. Like, oh, I want to save money. I have financial goals. You should be looking at your bank statements and your incoming finances instead of just guessing. You have no clue whether or not you're making progress. So that's what it comes down to. Is I think if you're really going to determine and set up all this, tracking would be a big thing if you can get yourself there. But yeah, of course, the mental piece comes first. The second question I have for you is, do you think there's a place for, and of course, if this is available for you and you're able to, the meal prep services or pre-made meals? Do you think that's a viable option to help things out? I'm thinking more like the ease factor that you're talking about, like how easy you can make it on yourself.
I do. And I know some people like just don't like them, but especially if time is not on your side, there are a lot of meal delivery services that have calorie smart options now. I know Green Chef and HelloFresh both do. I think they're all less than 500 calories. There's a protein smart option. You can really tailor it to your specific goals, which is great nowadays. And you know the calories are there, you know it's all measured out for you. So it could just make it a little bit easier. The mental load, even if it's just your 3 days a week, you kind of choose, then you only have to worry about the other 4. Like it could just take away a little bit of that planning aspect, worrying about what you're going to be eating. You can plan timing for it. So I think there's definitely a place for them. It's not something I would say like have every single day. You could definitely get sick of it.
Yeah, and not the cheapest option either.
Yeah. But I think it really works for, there's a lot of people that really, really benefit from it, especially from just a time and planning piece.
Yeah. I think those are huge because the ease effort, it's greasing the slide. Like it's swimming downstream versus upstream. Positioning matters. If you're in a position where all the choices you have to make are easy, the likelihood of you sticking to something long-term is going to just go up. It's like having that option. Because I'm a big fan of the pre-made meals like Kevin's, Counter, those pre-made ones that you can freeze, keep in your refrigerator, heat up super quick, make a bomb meal.
Oh yeah, even those. It doesn't even have to be a meal delivered. Like frozen food meals. What are they?
Costco and
like
Sam's
even some lean cuisines are good.
Oh, they've stepped their game
Some
up.
might not be enough food and you have to add a little bit to it, but it's still something. Like it's still something. I think those are great.
Lean cuisines stepped their game up. I love Counter foods. I love Kevin's. That's like some gourmet-ish that's ready in 5 minutes. That taste bomb, macros are on point.
Trader Joe's has a lot of good frozen like meal options.
Okay, because that's what I wanted to get your take on, just to see the ease of it. Because really, it is. Remember, you're doing this for months, minimum a couple months. The easier you can make things on yourself, the less you have to think about it. The more habitual, the more it can just fit into your life, the better it's going to stick. So I would say, like we were talking about, take the extra time and effort to think about this, adjust when it comes to your food, because this is the biggest piece that matters. So once you set and define your goal, you dial up your training, your movement, you can get the most out of your day from a calorie burn perspective. You can then more set up your deficit, and that's what's going to get you there. Now, this is the thing that I see separates winners from losers, people that are successful or not, a step 4. The biggest thing is how well you can adapt and overcome plateaus is a big piece of it. Because there is one thing that is for certain in any measure of progress, in business, in relationships, in weight loss, in building muscle. You cannot get all the way to the finish line unless you hit a plateau. right? There's no such measurable progress that exists without hitting a plateau. You're going to need to know how to adapt. If you do not, I can promise you now, and this is again, you can do this. It takes extra effort. This is why coaches are valuable, but you can do this on your own. People don't realize that you can do this on your own. You have to know how to adapt. You have to. So how do we know when to adapt, how to adapt what to this? We've talked a lot up to this point about tracking what's going into the process, right? You're tracking your workouts, hopefully, right? In an app like Stack, but you're tracking your workouts, you're tracking your food. You've got your goal laid out for you. You can track all of that, but if you're not paying attention to how your body is responding, right? The other end of that math equation for the calorie deficit, if you don't know how your body's responding, you have no clue if what you're doing is working or not. It's almost all a waste. You can track the perfect deficit. You can train as hard as you want. But if you don't track and measure your progress, you have no clue if what you're doing is working. You have no clue. So it starts by learning exactly where to pay attention to and how your body is progressing. Okay, that matters. And I think even before that, you have to come to terms. I think expectations are a big piece of communication with yourself and others. You have to realistically know what to expect when it comes to progress. Because if you think, and this is where a lot of, it's slowly going away from that, but still a lot of the fitness world is geared towards quick hits, fast results, shortcuts. If you're not losing 10 pounds in the first 2 weeks, you're doing it wrong. That's not how progress realistically works. But if that's your expectation, and after 2 or 3 weeks of doing everything right, you haven't seen that progress, even though you're progressing, if you don't know where to look at it, you're going to give up. You're going to give up, right? Here's how long fitness results actually take. This is important to actually realize and set expectations. And everyone's going to be different. But here's how long fitness results actually take. In the first 1 to 2 weeks, or weeks 1 to 2, if you're doing everything right, you're going to start to see progress on the scale if you're taking daily weigh-ins. Okay? Maybe an initial drop or at least a steady line starting to trend down. It won't be until weeks 3 to 4 your strength and endurance will start to noticeably increase. So you'll be able to lift heavier on most major movements or exercises in the gym. You can push further in cardio before burning out, and you'll notice these effects in your day-to-day life with your energy and fatigue. Now, weeks 5 or 6, so this is 5 or 6 weeks into it at this point. All right, weeks 5 to 6, you're going to start to notice that your clothes might start to fit differently. Okay, a little looser if you're losing weight, and maybe the arms and shoulders get a little bit tighter if you're gaining muscle. But it isn't until weeks 6 to 8 until you just start to see physical changes in the mirror. And I need to hit that home for y'all. It isn't until weeks 6 to 8 until you just start to see physical changes in the mirror. Okay. And this is, to be clear, this is if you've been consistent up to this point. And most people I see don't even make it to the part where they start to actually see the progress from everything they've done 6 to 8 weeks in, when you actually start to see the results. Because when you see the results, you get excited, you get motivated. You're like, holy crap, it's working. Most people don't even make it there because they just quit after a few weeks. Okay. And that's just when it starts picking up. So stay consistent with the things we've talked about today for just 6 to 8 weeks. And I promise you, it will be so easy to keep going once you get there. So easy. But you have to set realistic expectations. Don't quit before 6 to 8 weeks. I'll give you that mark. If you do 8 weeks and if you can say you're giving your best effort, then you can try and reassess, take a break, whatever you want, but don't quit before then. Because whoever's selling you something quicker than that, that's just not how real life works. That's important to things to adjust first. Now, when it comes down to where to pay attention to things, we're going to talk about several methods to use to track and measure progress, and then how to adapt from each one. Again, the most important part here, if you're going to make it to the end. But I want you to see any of these individual tools, or I guess any of these individual measures as a tool, like a hammer. I think is a good analogy to do this. Like, let's see a scale, right? The scale to measure your weight or weigh-ins. Okay. A scale is a super helpful tool. If you're trying to lose weight, it's a super helpful tool. But just like a hammer, you can't build an entire house. You probably shouldn't be putting all your focus and attention onto the scale because it can't measure everything. It measures how much gravity is pushing you down towards the core of the earth. That's what it's measuring. That's it. Okay. So like a hammer is really good when you have to nail something in. It's not good at tiling a roof or putting tile in your bathroom or building a shower. It's not good at these things. So you have to see these things as data points, neither good or bad, just data points to collect more information to make making the right choice easier. That's all any of this is: tracking your food, tracking your weight, tracking anything. So to start out, and this is, again, if you're in the mental space where you're seeing it as a data point, it's not impacting you, start off with weighing yourself on the scale. The more frequent, the better. And this is just, look at it from a data perspective. Don't take it personal on your weight. Look at it from a data perspective. The more data points you have, the more clear the picture becomes of what you're dealing with. Okay, so weekly weigh-ins will be better than monthly weigh-ins. Daily weigh-ins will be better than weekly weigh-ins because it's giving you a clear, defined picture of where and how your body's responding. So I enjoy daily weigh-ins. In the morning, first thing when you wake up, go use the restroom, but just don't eat, don't drink anything, because it's going to fluctuate. People's body weight fluctuates up to 8 pounds a day on just water weight. But at least the morning is going to be the most consistent. And if you can, we've shouted out the app Happy Scale countless times here. It actually measures your trending weight. So even though you might have gained weight overnight 2 or 3 pounds, because that's normal based on water weight, it'll give you your trending weight so you can clearly see the patterns forming over the past several weeks of taking these measurements. So you have to see them as data points. Okay, the more frequent, the better, generally. The next big thing, because that's only measuring your body mass, is how do we measure weight versus fat? The best way to do so is going to be looking at progress photos. And this is on your own, something that's hard to hold yourself accountable to, but honestly, schedule it in your calendar. That's what I would say. Schedule it for 15 minutes on a Saturday morning, a Friday morning, whatever morning you have the most time, where you're going to review your scale. You're going to take progress photos. Again, the more consistent, the better. But this will help tell you whether the weight you're losing is coming from weight or fat. You'll start to see physique changes. Okay, so where you're leaning out, where you become more defined. And you can actually start to tell what parts of your body develop faster than others. I like to do these mostly on a weekly basis because you have to realize you're not going to be able to take anything meaningful from one week to the next.
Yeah.
Because, like, what do you know if you sleep like crap, you have a super salty meal, and you stay up a little too late the night before? How are you going to look in the morning?
Bloated as hell.
A little bloated, a little puffy eyed, right? Like that's how I look, at least. So if you take that and then you compare it to the previous week where it was like after you just nailed your diet, nailed your sleep, nailed your training, you're going to look and appear thinner. Even though you might have lost weight that week and lost body fat, you could appear worse. So it's when you stack those things together. Same thing with a day-to-day scale weigh-in. One weigh-in gives you zero usable information. Zero. You need to reference it against something else. And I think the biggest piece that people need to track, there's two others, is going to be your strength. And this is why tracking your workouts is important. In an app like Stacked is a free app that you can track your workouts. Your Notes app, as I know you're a big Notes app fan. I like it too. But your strength is big, especially if you can map it out, because here's why. If your strength is increasing and your weight is decreasing, without seeing progress photos, without taking measurements, without anything else, if your strength is increasing and your weight is decreasing, you can pretty much guarantee that you are losing fat, not muscle. And you might even be gaining muscle and recomping, because guess what you don't generally see when you're losing muscle? Getting stronger. You just don't, that doesn't happen. Okay, maybe in very, very new individuals in the right circumstance, but even then, you're not going to get stronger while losing muscle mass. You have to realize that. So if you're tracking those two things, that'll tell you whether or not you're going in the right direction. And then this is one thing I know we talked about a little bit ago, but how big is the biofeedback aspect? Your hunger cues, your energy fatigue, your sleep, how big is that during the week?
It's huge, because it's going to change. And I feel like people have these expectations that you're just going to be like, yep, I have these goals. I know what I'm supposed to do. This is how my body is going to respond. No, shit happens. And pay attention to when your body is telling you something may not be working so great.
Your body, a lot of the times, is yelling, trying to send a signal at you. It is yelling at you like, yo. Because like when we talk about like how long is too long to stay in a deficit, it's impossible to tell exactly how long by just estimating it. Your body will tell you. It is yelling at you, but if you're not listening or you're not paying attention, you won't know when is too long, when you need to pump the brakes, when you can go a little harder. Like we actually made a feedback, like a weekly feedback Google Doc that you can send yourself or keep filling out with yourself to the FS Premium. The other week we did with an AMA. Remember we sent that out, where you can just track those things. How many nights a week have you slept? You know, out of the last 7 nights, how many did you get a good night's sleep of 7 hours or more? Most people will average like 5 or 6 in a good week. They always have like 1 or 2 weird nights. But if that over time, you start to notice, oh, when I started the first few weeks, I was getting 5 or 6 good nights of sleep every night. But lately I've been getting 3 or 4 and then 1 or 2. Your body's telling you something. Your body's telling you something, or your hunger cues. I was feeling hungry, but now I'm starving through the day. And a lot of the time, if you don't have that little metric in place, it's just a simple Google Doc, or just keep tracking your notes every week. But paying attention to your energy through the day, when you get fatigued during your workouts, how you're sleeping, your hunger cues. Those are the 4 biggest things that you can track for progress that will tell you how your body's responding, so you know whether or not you're doing the right thing, right? So that'll at least tell you when you need to adjust. If your weight is not moving down, you know that you're not in a calorie deficit. So your training might be good, everything else might be good, but okay, what can we address? Let me look, okay, do I have room to increase how many calories I'm burning per day through movement, through training? Or do I need to shave off a little bit of what I'm taking in? Do I need to tighten the rails when it comes to nutrition? That'll tell you how to adapt, because you're going to hit some sort of a plateau when you're making progress. And I do want to touch on this because I think we've touched in an AMA on plateaus before.
Yeah.
I want to be clear on this, because 90% of the people who have come to me saying that they've hit a plateau aren't in plateaus. All right. It's really easy to be like, oh my God, I haven't lost weight this week. I'm in a plateau. Shut up. Don't worry about it. Be patient. Most of it boils down to either being patient, AKA you need to not make progress for at least 2 to 3 weeks for me to say, okay, we might be hitting a plateau. For women, sometimes even longer, depending on like weight fluctuations during their cycle. But it's not just when your scale stops moving. You need to be looking at everything. If over the course of a month, your weight hasn't moved, your progress photos haven't changed, your measurements haven't changed, your strength in the gym hasn't changed, your biofeedback's more or less the same, okay, we might be in a plateau. But here's what kills me. That's not real unless you've been doing exactly what you were doing in the first place to see progress. And that's where, when I ask some questions and dig a little bit deeper, I find out most people are not. Right? 90% of the time, people just don't realize that they're not being as consistent with the things that got them progress in the first place when doing it. Right? For example, they might have bought a food scale and have been weighing everything that they put in their mouth for the first couple months or the first month, and they were killing it with progress. And now it's like, oh, well, I just kind of eyeball it. I got the hang of it. I get it. You don't realize how much over time that slowly moves further away from what's accurate. Or they're not as consistent in the gym. That's one of my favorite stories to tell. When I moved out to Atlanta to help open and run the Orange Theory, it tracked how many workouts people were doing every month. Every time you checked in, it would track how many workouts you would do. And when you ask someone, oh, hey, how many workouts do you think you've done, as a little thought experiment, this is probably a D-bag thing to do, but like, how many workouts do you think you've been doing? It was all in fun over the past month. And they're like, oh, well, I try and get here 5 days a week, probably missed 1 or 2. So 4 weeks a month. I probably got 18 to 20 workouts in. And you look at it, it's like, oh, they got 9 or 10 or 11. You tend to overestimate how good you're doing with things. Or maybe that your lifestyle has changed, where before you worked from home and you were getting 12,000 steps a day, and now you don't realize that you're working in an office and you're only averaging 7,000 steps a day. That's going to make a big difference. So a lot of the time, it's not that what you were doing and was working stopped working. It's that you're not doing it anymore.
Yeah.
So that's what a big thing is. And when you actually do hit one, because it'll happen, consider a diet break, which I want to get your thoughts on, but consider a diet break and then use the data that you've been tracking to identify how you can increase the size of your deficit if you want to keep going without a diet break. Identify where you have the most room. I'm always a bigger fan of keeping your food the same and trying to increase how many you're burning rather than just cutting your calories lower. But
same.
If you start at a good size deficit, you'll have a little bit of wiggle room where if you're starting at 2,600 calories, you have room to bump it down to 22, 23 if the time gets there and you need to. Probably won't, but you might need to. That's okay. But don't get a little bit too low as we're coming down. So that's when it comes down to how to adapt, because if you don't know how to adapt, you might make progress up front, but it's the then what next kind of part. And that's what we're focused on, right? Then what? Which leads us right into the 5th and final step. Once you learn how to do this, you need to set up an exit strategy. What?
It's not forever. Like, it's crazy how no one talks about this, and it pisses me off. No one freaking talks about the fact that you are not supposed to be in a calorie deficit forever. And I think that's why there's so much, people hate them so much and get so triggered when anyone says calorie deficit, which is so stupid as it is, but because no one is looking at them as such a temporary thing. Like, it is such a temporary thing and is not normal and not how what your body wants to be in. It's not where your body wants to be. It's temporary. I don't know. It pisses me off how no one like looks at it like that.
Yeah.
It
come down, I think we did this in the goal setting episode, but if your goal is just to lose 20 pounds or to lose 30 pounds, Because I guarantee
Yeah.
once you return back to your normal lifestyle habits, you're going to gain the weight you lost.
Mm-hmm.
You need a plan because you shouldn't have to track or want to track food forever. You shouldn't want to do everything that like I've had a lot of clients talk to me, and as we're going through a successful weight loss phase, fat loss phase, they're like, okay, this is all awesome. I'm pumped. I'm learning a lot, but I'm worried that I have to do this forever if I want to maintain it. It's like, no, that's the whole point.
Mm-hmm.
Once you get there, you need to set an exit strategy. So not just I want to lose 20 pounds, but I want to lose 20 pounds, get down to this specific body weight, and then transition my life so I can stay that weight. That's the goal. That's the big goal. So there's a few different tactics I think you can do, and it really depends on how aggressive, what you had to change to get there. Because there is a reverse dieting strategy. There is returning just straight to where your maintenance is or was. There's a transition. You can take it into a building or bulking phase. There's a lot of different ways you can take it. And I think a lot of it's going to come down to that guardrail idea that we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But I think to decide what is best for you, and I want to get your take on this, I think as soon as you hit the goal, a lot of people celebrate. They stop and they celebrate. They say, hell yeah, I did all this work. I did this for months. I was consistent. And they almost, I'm not saying you can't celebrate, but you shouldn't ditch everything that got you that progress in the first place. Like, honestly, if you really want it to stick, let's say a successful weight loss, let's say it's over 6 months. Could be longer, could be shorter for the person, but let's say over 6 months. I think it's worth spending 1 or 2 months in that transition phase rather than just saying, I made it 6 months, I'll stop here, to guarantee it, right? Where you continue to track your progress. Like as you're starting to lighten the load, is step away from tracking everything that you eat and stepping away from tracking everything. I still think it's worth stepping on the scale every day if that's what you did. So you can make sure that you're staying in the same realm and you can catch yourself. Because guess what? If you lost 30 pounds, you're not going to regain it in a week. You're not going to gain it in a day. So if you're paying attention to it, you can catch it before it happens. Ooh, it's starting to trend up. What am I doing wrong? Where did I loosen the reins? And you can do that. Now you can expect to gain a few pounds after coming off a deficit. And that's from extra stored water from the food, extra stored glycogen from carbs you're eating, and even just the food mass in your body. If you're eating more food, it's in your body through the digestion process. You're going to gain a few pounds. And once you've tracked your progress and have maintained your goal for a few months, then I think you can start really setting in more guardrails to step further and further away.
I also think it's important to mention, this is where it's important to set a realistic fat loss goal. Because if you are looking to be able to do this, to stay at that weight, you want to make sure that that weight, your goal weight, wasn't something that was so extreme that you had to take your eating, your calorie deficit to an extreme, your training, that this is so unsustainable. Your body is not supposed to be that lean all the time. It's hard to sustain, and people can, but don't want to. It's not. So that's really important. And I just felt like I needed to address that.
No, that is a big piece, because sometimes you might push things further than it needs to be in order to get there. And I think a lot of people that listen to our show, hopefully by now, get the point. It's not all a number thing, like a weight thing. It's more how they look, how they feel.
How you feel.
So yeah, when they start to get that low, but yeah, you got to realize and check yourself. Like you do got to know yourself. We talked about that in the last episode of Goal Setting. You got to know you're dealing with you, not someone else. That's a big piece of it. So that's a good point to start.
Yeah. And you may have set a goal to lose, 20 pounds, and you've lost 15 and you're like, I'm good. I'm cool. I want to get out of this. I'm set where I am. Now what do I do? That's also common. It's also good to help you for what if you don't want to go as far as the goal that you've achieved? Like, how do I slowly move away from that? So there's definitely like guardrails you can put into place. And I personally think it's really helpful to start like kind of in the beginning before setting these guardrails to look at what maintenance might look like for you. So not just all of a sudden you stop tracking, but like maybe take 1 to 2 weeks to still track and look like, wait, what is maintenance going to look like? How many calories is like
your maintenance could have changed.
Calories going to look like? Yes. Yeah. So that can be really helpful just to get an idea of what those like portion sizes for maintenance look. Again, it's a data. It's just giving you more tools in the back of your mind so that you don't have to track later. But again, it might add on a little bit more time tracking. But now you're going to get an understanding of what eating for maintenance looks like versus eating to be in a deficit. Setting up these guardrails may make it easier once you do stop tracking. So a big one that I will typically recommend, a good starting place for people is to can still continue with a protein goal. You're not tracking anymore, but I still have a little bit of control. I still have that guidance to go by, and it still keeps you almost on course without being super strict about it. So
yeah, because how much less effort does it take to pay attention to a protein goal, which you can estimate in your head pretty easily, rather than a calorie goal, which you kind of got to track in an app every meal if you really want us to. It takes a huge mental load off, but it's something you can still do pretty accurately, right?
Yeah. And then another, just this is a nutrition tip, something that you could do is focusing on this sort of idea of eating higher volume meals. This can be really helpful just for, even if you want to lose weight without tracking, like this is also something that I can recommend, or even when you're in a deficit, but also coming out, this can be really helpful, is to focus on foods lower in calorie density and higher in nutrient density can be a good guide. So not 100% of the time, you don't have to eat these super low calorie foods all the time. No, that's not what I'm saying. But when you're building your larger meals, this can be a little bit helpful. Calorie density refers to the amount of calories in relation to the total amount of a particular food. Calorie dense foods contain high levels of calories per serving. So strawberries are going to be lower in calorie density. Nuts are going to be higher in calorie density. A cup of strawberries, you're going to get a lot of food versus for lower calories versus a cup of almonds for the same amount of calories, you're going to get way less food. So that's this idea of volume eating.
Yeah, it just tells your stomach that you're full. That hunger feeling will go away when you're volume eating more.
Yeah, so that can be helpful. And you can also look at nutrient density too, but this is, I just like to mention it, but nutrient dense foods can be high in calorie density, like nuts. But if you're looking more so just wanting to eat for health as well, focusing on nutrient density is going to be helpful, but it's the amount of nutrients in relation to the total amount of particular food. Nutrient dense foods contain high levels of nutrients per serving, but it doesn't mean that they're lower in calorie density. But sometimes people really confuse the two. And that's where I say, like, just because you're eating healthy doesn't always mean you're eating for weight loss or you're eating for maintenance. Sometimes the calories can really rack up in these nutrient dense foods. That's volume eating. That can be like a guide that you can use. It also can just help you eat healthy. I find it can help you eat a little bit healthier in general. Like it can be like some people just like to eat a lot of food in a sitting and it takes a little bit more to get hungry, and it just can give you a little bit more peace of mind, because I know personally, like I would get stressed if someone told me to eat a little bit of bitty meal. I eat like it takes a lot more for me to get hungry. I know I'm going to have to eat a little bit more food.
Yeah.
So volume eating can be very helpful.
I was going to say, those two things big time, especially just touch on the why behind the protein aspect a little bit too. And why, because we say a guardrail, the reference is from a few episodes ago is when I think we brought up the topic of essentially something to keep you headed in the right direction, keep you in line without falling off a freaking cliff, like down to your spiral.
Yeah.
And why protein is so huge. And you realize this in study after study, but the higher protein intake you have, the better it controls your overall food intake. Because there's this idea of like transitioning to intuitive eating, or really like just paying attention and eating what's intuitive to you. But your hunger cues are still going to be there. So if you're eating low volume, high calorie dense foods, low protein diet overall, what's intuitive to you is going to be a lot more total calories than what's intuitive if you had these guardrails in place, right? So eating and continuing a high protein diet. You don't have to be starving yourself. You shouldn't even be hungry that often when you're doing this too. But having that high protein goal is just going to keep you more satiated. So even when you stop tracking calories, you'll be more likely to fall within that window of what is your maintenance or what's close to it than if you didn't do that. So that's why we put the protein goal in place, and why that's a huge one. Same thing with volume eating, is it's just going to steer you into eating to your maintenance without you having to pay attention to what your maintenance is. I thought that's important to touch on the why behind it too. And same thing with the portions and the volume.
Yeah. So portion size, using portion sizes as a guide is going to be huge. I mean, I still would recommend, taking those 2 weeks to look at what maintenance looks like for you, getting an idea of those portions for maintenance. But that's going to change. That's going to fluctuate. And it's not always going to be on your side if you're not tracking your calories. But you can get an idea of how to build your plate. So in this, you could take with you, like breaking down how you can build your plate, build your larger meals is something you could take with you throughout your life. Using this as a guide I really think it's one of the most simple, basic things, but it's my most valuable nutrition strategy I give to everyone, because if you actually take a little time to think about how to structure your meals, it can go a long way. And this can help tap into your protein goal. It's going to help tap into your volume eating. But breaking down your plate, if you have a dinner size plate, try to make half of that plate high fiber veggies or fruits or a mixture of the two. A quarter of the plate protein, or whatever your protein goal is, if you already know you have that set, what that looks like. The other quarter of your plate should be some complex carbs like whole grains or starchy vegetables, and then like 2 larger spoonfuls of healthy fats. So like cheeses, oils, butters, nuts, seeds, avocado. That, you can write that down. I'm not asking you to memorize that off the top of your head, but now you have this almost cheat code for how to build your meals so that they're going to be, one, high in protein and high in fiber, which is going to really help with that satiety effect. You're going to get a lot of micronutrients. It's going to be good for your gut health. It's going to be very filling. It's going to be something that you can switch up, you don't get sick of too often, and it's going to make you less likely to overeat later. And it's going to be a little bit easier to not feel like you're snacking all the time or reaching for so many foods or feeling out of control around food. It's like this is the epitome of a quote unquote balanced plate, which I hate saying, but it can be really, really helpful. And some people need a little bit more of that structure, and you can aim for your larger meals to kind of look like that. And you don't have to track it. It's very visual. And I think it's so helpful, but yeah, that might just be me.
No, it is big. And I think the 2 different strategies to bridge that gap, because you're going to be in a calorie deficit when you get to the end point. And the goal then is to return back up to maintenance some way or another, in whatever you want to do it. The 2 different methods, because I know we've touched on it before, but I know people are probably questioning, is the reverse dieting method, which is where every 1 to 2 weeks, you slowly increase your calorie intake to bridge that gap. So if you're eating in a, let's say, 800 calorie deficit, that would mean every 1 to 2 weeks, you increase what you're eating by 200 calories. So by the 4 to 8 week mark, you're back to your maintenance, like that bridging technique, or just starting to eat 800 calories more, right? When you look at the research, you're not going to gain excess fat if you just jump to maintenance rather than if you bridge it with a reverse diet. That's important to understand. But that is the whole first order consequence thing we've talked about. Where I think a reverse dieting or bridging technique can help is taking small steps from what is normal to you to get you somewhere else. So if you just go straight from eating 800 calories left to just jumping in, that's where you see a lot of people who will overdo it, overeat, because it's so different than what they're used to. Their pantries are not set up for this. Same thing when, you know what I'm saying? Like whenever you transition in or out of like a deficit phase, you realize how much that your pantry, your food is just set towards that one style of eating. So that's where I think a reverse method, or you can even break it up into smaller steps, bigger steps, whatever's for you, is helpful, not from a body composition standpoint on the first level, but on the second level of it's easier to wrap your head of, eating just 200 calories more. Oh, what can I change about my current structure? Okay, that's normal. A week or 2 later, what's 200 calories more, 300 calories more? It's easier to take those steps sometimes to be consistent than just making the big jump. I thought that was worth talking about.
Oh, no, I would actually say that's preferred, to be honest. Like it's going to add a little bit more time, but I think I would recommend that any day over just jumping into maintenance. And I don't if you guys can tell, these guardrails this is assuming like you're not dropping all these other habits you've implemented. Yeah. It's not just because this shouldn't be like some yo-yo diet that you do and then you just stop. You should be making these changes along the way to your eating habits, your lifestyle, your exercise, that you keep these habits that you keep for forever, and make slight adjustments so they become something that becomes second nature. How to structure your meals, what meal prep looks like for you, how much is enough for you. It might sound crazy right now, but that will all become second nature if you are putting these habits in place that are realistic, that are sustainable. So when you stop being in a deficit, it's not like you just throw everything you did out the window. No, I'm still keeping these habits that I made. I'm still doing the damn thing. Now I get to eat a little bit more food, and it's going to be a lot easier because I don't have to track anymore. And my life is going to be, I'm going to free up some headspace. It's going to be great. But this is a life change. It's not just some losing fat is like the process shouldn't be about doing something that is quick and then you don't think about what you did ever again. So
you should still be like your daily movement, your workouts. those shouldn't be changing much when you're going through it. If you're
No.
walking 10,000 steps a day, don't just forget about that. Don't forget about hitting weights 4 times a week. You should be doing those things. And this is the food part. That's a perfect point because so many people just stop. You're slowly changing one thing at a time. Now, I think in the exit strategy and getting things set up, there's a few, I think, housekeeping notes that we want to go through and just briefly touch on that still matter. These are the big pieces, the big rocks that we just talked about. But the housekeeping part, do you want to move on to that? Like the small things to pay attention to, your sleep, how long is too long, things like that. Because I think when it comes down to it, we've talked about sleep. And if you haven't listened to the episode on how to fix your sleep, can't recommend it enough. That's one of those things that's, again, going to grease the slide for you, make things easier or make things harder. Mostly, I mean, one, due to it being the main period of your day when you're actually recovering. So you notice body composition usually changes much better in better quality sleep. But even more so, I think the hunger cues and the resilience and the mindset aspect. When you're sleeping poorly, your resilience decreases. Extremely well noted in research. Your resilience, your ability, your willpower significantly decreases. Your hunger cues massively increase, especially ghrelin, the little guy that's telling you you are hungry right now, increase after even just one poor night's sleep. So if you're not sleeping well, all of the things that we talked about just become 2 times, 3 times, 10 times harder to stay consistent with. Where if you're sleeping well, your hunger cues are going to be more regulated. You'll have a better mindset, less stress to deal with it and actually go through. So we got to touch on that as a piece. And I think I want to get your take on this. And that is the diet break strategy, which is the question of, we've heard this a lot. It's been researched quite a bit too, but I want to get your opinion on it, especially if you're someone who's got to lose a significant amount of weight, so like more than 10 to 20 pounds. Is it worth going for a few months? And a diet break is essentially when you're dieting, you're in a deficit successfully for like 3 to 4 months. And then you take a quote unquote diet break where you return to maintenance for 2-3 months and then go back into it. Where instead of just doing like a year at once, you split it up into 2, 3, 4 increments with little breaks. Do you think that's a useful strategy for some people?
I think it can be, absolutely, especially if you are finding it harder to just be in a deficit. You're picking up on your body just like, man, like I cannot hit my deficit goal multiple days in a row. It's been a few weeks and I just keep going over. I feel like it's taking up too much headspace. I feel like I'm tired. I'm not being able to again, and these are things that you could pick up on that might be a sign that you just need to, your deficit might be too low. So assuming that your deficit isn't too low, like you've addressed that, I think that a diet break can be super helpful depending on the person.
And I touch on it because it's hard to do from an ego perspective when other people are influencing your decision, because you are intentionally stopping what's getting you the progress before you get to the end, technically, right? Like if you have 40 pounds to lose and you're taking a break after 10, that's a hard thing for your ego to wrap itself around of, I'm not a quitter. But think about this from the doing it right perspective. And that's why I like tracking your biofeedback, like your hunger cues, your sleep, things like that. That'll tell you if you've been doing this for too long. And I guess I'll just put this in perspective for people who are considering it, or maybe who haven't been able to stick it out the entire time and that's been their sticking point. Seriously consider a diet break for 4 to 8 weeks when you hit those points of intentionally tracking your food back up to maintenance, keeping your activity there. But it just lets you breathe again of like, whew, okay, I made it through and enter back in, where who cares if you have 50 pounds to lose and you just go let's say 6 months straight and you lose that 50 pounds. If you can't do that sustainably, is that really much better than if you took, let's say 9 months instead, where you take a month-long break every 1 to 2 months when you lose about 15 to 20 pounds? 6 versus 9 months, but if you do it in 9 months, you're going to actually stick to it. You're going to make that progress. You're going to keep it. That's not that big of a difference in the grand scheme of things. I know in the moment it is, because you're like, oh my God, 3 more months of this. In 5 years, you're going to look back and be like, I don't remember those 3. That was all the same thing to me. And if the difference really is you making it to the end and you not, and you're burning yourself out, strongly consider something like that. Especially, I mean, when the gap from where you are and where you want to be is so far, it's with our side, you gravitate towards the quick hits, the quick fixes, the hacks, the whatever it might be. It's just human nature. But I think that's a good point to end it on and I've just learned, this is probably one of the most valuable lessons I've learned, through life and have to constantly remind myself of, and I think if you made it this far, please do so, is that the lack of patience changes the outcome in anything in life. This is in business, in anything, but the lack of patience changes the outcome, period. It does. So whenever you're thinking about making a decision, whether I do this diet or this trend or that trend, remember that the lack of patience changes the outcome. It can get you in a lot more trouble and create a lot more problems than you need to be in. So consider that as you're going through everything. But that was a solid one. That was a good first episode of the year. Gosh, dang, that was a good episode to start the year. So again, if you rated us 5 stars or have before or just are now doing it, shoot us a DM over on Instagram. And for the next 2 weeks until January 14th is when that giveaway is doing it. We are giving away $250 in Legion supplements, whatever you want, and a year to FS Premium. Shoot us that DM and we'll be announcing the winner after January 14th. Everything I think else, the episodes that we mentioned and referenced, the calculators, the tools that we referenced, the meal prep essential list, all is going to be in the show notes down below. But cheers to a new year.